Chapter 18. The Board Takes Shape. 4 days into his investigation, Cael sat at the small table in his modest quarters, surrounded by the fruits of his intelligence gathering. The surface was covered with pieces of paper organized into 3 distinct columns, each representing a different level of confidence in the information's authenticity. The oil lamp cast flickering shadows across his work as he reviewed what his network had uncovered about Commander Ravina's true purpose in Concordia. Outside, the city's nighttime sounds provided familiar background noise, distant conversations, the clip of horse hooves on cobblestone, the occasional patrol passing beneath his window. Confirmed, marked with green ink. Ravina spends most of her time in murk dusk, not Concordia. She has been conducting extensive genealogical research. Historical archives from multiple realms have been requisitioned for her use. Her behavior has become more focused and intense in recent months. Research teams from 3 different realms are assisting her. She has access to mythical historical documents. She possesses abilities that soldiers are forbidden to discuss with civilians. Likely, marked with blue ink, the genealogical research is personal, not military. She's searching for specific individuals or bloodlines. Her true form, wings, glowing eyes, is connected to ancient supernatural lineages. The research predates her assignment to Concordia. This posting serves her personal agenda. Whatever she's seeking is time-sensitive, explains increased urgency. Her shape-shifting abilities allow her to gather information undetected. The game with him is partly boredom, partly testing his skills for unknown purposes. Probable misdirection, marked with red ink. Reports that she's lonely and seeking intellectual companionship. Suggestions that her interest in him is purely romantic sexual. Information implying her supernatural nature is widely known among her forces. Claims that the research is connected to weapon development. Stories about her being difficult to work with or unstable. Cael leaned back in his chair, studying the pattern that was emerging from his careful analysis. The confirmed information painted a picture of someone conducting a methodical search through historical records, looking for something specific enough to require resources from multiple realms. The genealogical focus suggested she was tracing family lines, possibly including her own. But the likely category revealed something more intriguing. If Ravina was indeed supernatural, which Marta's testimony strongly suggested, then her genealogical research might be about understanding her own origins or finding others of her kind. The misdirection category was equally telling. Someone was deliberately feeding his network false information designed to make Ravina appear more vulnerable or emotionally driven than she actually was. The sophistication of the misdirection suggested it was coming from someone who understood intelligence operations, possibly Ravina herself, testing his ability to separate truth from deception. A soft knock at his door interrupted his analysis. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. The pattern identified evening communications from his network. "Enter," he called, quickly covering his notes with a mundane ledger he kept for this purpose. The door opened to admit Petra, her weathered face showing the strain of operating under increased scrutiny since their chapel meeting. "Evening report," she said quietly, settling onto the room's only other chair. "Though I'm not sure how much of it you'll want to believe. Tell me everything. I'll sort truth from fiction." Petra nodded, pulling a small piece of paper from her sleeve. 3 new pieces from different sources. First, from the kitchens at the governor's residence. Commander Ravina has been receiving packages from archivists in the Shadowlands. Old books, sealed documents, that sort of thing. The deliveries happen at night, always handled personally by her. Cael made a mental note. The Shadowlands were known for maintaining extensive historical records, including documentation of supernatural bloodlines. This supported his theory about genealogical research. Second, Petra continued, from one of the cleaning staff, she's been burning documents in her private chambers. Not casually. Full destruction, ashes scattered from the window. Whatever she's eliminating, she's being very thorough about it. Interesting. Ravina was destroying evidence of her research, which suggested either she'd found what she was looking for or she was covering her tracks before departing. And third, Cael prompted. Petra's expression became troubled. This one's strange. From Mira at the tavern. Apparently one of the regular girls, Elena, had a new client yesterday. Human appearance, but something felt wrong about him. Said he asked very specific questions about you. Your habits, your schedule, whether you'd seemed different lately. Cael felt his blood chill. Description? Average height, brown hair, nothing distinctive. But Elena said his eyes were wrong, too knowing, like he was seeing more than he let on. Petra met his gaze directly. Could be routine security checking up on you. Could be something else entirely. Could be Ravina herself, Cael said quietly, testing whether I'd detect her infiltration of my network. Petra nodded grimly. That's what I was afraid you'd say. If she's shapeshifting to look like potential clients, then any of our contacts could unknowingly provide information directly to her. The implications were staggering. If Ravina could take any human form, then his entire network was potentially compromised. Every piece of intelligence could be authentic, misdirection, or a test of his analytical abilities. From now on, Cael said, we assume all information is potentially contaminated. Cross-reference everything, verify through multiple sources, and trust nothing that seems too convenient or too revealing. Understood, though that makes our job considerably harder. That's the point, Cael replied. She's not just testing whether I can uncover her real purpose. She's testing whether I can do it while she actively interferes with the investigation. After Petra departed, Cael returned to his analysis with new understanding. The game's complexity went far beyond simple intelligence gathering. Ravina was simultaneously the target of investigation and an active participant in providing information, some true, some false, all carefully calibrated to test his skills. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began documenting what he'd learned about her methods. Ravina's operational techniques, shape-shifting to infiltrate information networks, providing authentic intelligence mixed with deliberate misdirection, testing subjects' analytical abilities through complex deception, using psychological pressure to evaluate decision-making under stress, maintaining multiple layers of truth to obscure real objectives. The pattern suggested someone with extensive experience in intelligence operations, but also someone who approached them as intellectual exercises rather than purely practical necessities. She was playing games within games, testing not just his ability to gather information, but his capacity to think at her level. Most telling was her apparent enjoyment of the process. The game wasn't just about discovering her purpose. It was about proving he was intellectually worthy of understanding that purpose once he uncovered it. Cael looked at his organized notes with new perspective. The information in his confirmed column might be authentic, but it was probably also the information she wanted him to discover. The real intelligence would be found in the patterns between categories, in what was being concealed as much as what was being revealed. If she was conducting genealogical research using historical archives from multiple realms, including the Shadowlands, then she was almost certainly investigating supernatural bloodlines. Given her own apparent nature, this could be researching her own family history or origins, searching for others of her kind or species, investigating bloodlines connected to specific powers or abilities, tracing genealogies related to ancient conflicts or alliances. The burning of documents suggested either success in her search or preparation for departure. The timing of increased intensity in her research corresponded with her assignment to Concordia, which implied something in the city was relevant to her investigation. But what could Concordia contain that was significant to supernatural genealogical research? The city was old, but not ancient. It had served as a crossroads between realms, but so had many other locations. Unless… Cael paused, a new possibility occurring to him. What if Ravina's purpose wasn't to find something in Concordia, but to find someone? Someone whose bloodline or identity was connected to her research, someone who might be in the city without knowing their own significance. The thought was disturbing for multiple reasons, not least because it suggested every resident of Concordia was potentially relevant to her investigation. If she was searching for a specific individual with supernatural heritage, then her game with him might be more than intellectual entertainment. It might be evaluation for an entirely different purpose. As midnight approached, Cael carefully secured his notes and prepared for what remained of the night. 10 days remained in his investigation, and each day brought new layers of complexity to an already intricate puzzle. But he was beginning to see the shape of something larger, a purpose that went beyond military operations or research programs, something personal enough to justify months of careful preparation and complex deception. The White Lily had accepted a challenge more dangerous than he'd initially understood. But Commander Cael Varnor had built his career on solving impossible puzzles under deadly pressure. The question was whether this particular puzzle was meant to be solved, or whether discovering the truth was itself part of a larger game whose real purpose remained hidden in shadows deeper than any he'd learned to navigate. Outside his window, Concordia slept under the watchful eyes of forces that were not entirely human, and somewhere in the city, Ravina continued her search for something, or someone, whose significance would soon become terrifyingly clear. The board was taking shape, but Cael was beginning to suspect he wasn't the only player moving pieces across it. Chapter 19. Echoes in the Archives. 8 days into the investigation. The city archives occupied a sprawling stone building that predated Concordia's founding by several centuries. Originally constructed as a monastery, its thick walls and climate-controlled chambers had proven ideal for preserving documents from across the connected realms. Under the occupation, access had become restricted, but Cael's carefully cultivated relationship with the senior archivist had opened doors that remained closed to most civilians. Master Aldrich was a thin, scholarly man in his 70s whose passion for historical preservation had survived 3 different governments, and now the current occupation. His loyalty was to the documents themselves rather than any political authority, which made him exactly the kind of source Cael needed for sensitive inquiries. Research into genealogical records, Aldrich mused, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles as they walked through the archive's main hall. Yes, we've had several inquiries recently. Quite unusual, actually. Most people are more concerned with survival than ancestry these days. Several inquiries? Cael asked, keeping his tone casually interested rather than urgently investigative. 3 different researchers over the past few months. All very focused, very methodical. Each spent considerable time in our supernatural history collection and the mythical bloodlines section. Aldrich led him toward a reading room whose high windows provided natural light supplemented by carefully positioned oil lamps. Different researchers, but similar interests. Oh yes, though that's where it gets peculiar. Aldrich paused at a heavy wooden table covered with the kind of protective cloths used for handling ancient documents. The strange thing is, they all looked remarkably similar. Same general build, same colouring, same intensity of focus. Almost like, well, like the same person visiting at different times. Cael felt his pulse quicken but kept his expression neutral. Perhaps they were related, family members researching their common ancestry. Perhaps, Aldrich said, though his tone suggested he found this explanation insufficient. Though if so, they were remarkably consistent in their research methods. Each one requested access to the same specific collections, examined documents in the same systematic order, and took notes using identical organizational techniques. The archivist moved to a filing cabinet and withdrew a slim folder. I maintain visitor logs, of course, required by the current administration, but also useful for tracking research patterns and document usage. He opened the folder and spread 3 pages across the table. Each contained a sign-in sheet for different dates over the past 4 months, with names written in elegant script beside timestamps and areas of research focus. First visit, Lady Vera Nightwind, 2 weeks after the new commander arrived in Concordia. Spent 6 hours reviewing genealogical records of supernatural bloodlines with particular focus on demonic heritage documentation. Cael studied the signature, flowing, confident handwriting that suggested education and authority. Second visit, Miss Celine Darkwater, approximately 6 weeks later. 8 hours examining mythical family trees and ancient lineage verification documents, particularly interested in records from the Shadowlands and Umbral Realm. The second signature was subtly different, smaller, more careful, but the underlying hand structure was remarkably similar to the first. Third visit, Professor Liana Stormheart, just 2 weeks ago. 12 hours of intensive research into bloodline authentication methods and hereditary power manifestation patterns. Requested access to our most restricted genealogical archives. The third signature was bolder, more assertive, but again showed the same fundamental characteristics as the previous 2. "You see what I mean?" Aldrich asked, adjusting his spectacles again. "The names are different, the time intervals varied, but the signatures show remarkable consistency in pen pressure, letter formation, and overall style, as if the same person were attempting to disguise their handwriting but couldn't entirely suppress their natural patterns." Cael nodded thoughtfully. "And their appearance? You mentioned they looked similar." "Indeed. All 3 were women in their 30s with dark hair and unusual eye colouring. The first had violet eyes, quite striking. The second's eyes appeared more blue-grey, and the third's were definitely blue. But their facial structure, height, and general demeanour were almost identical." Shape-shifting. Ravina had been visiting the archives in different forms, conducting systematic research over months while maintaining plausible cover identities. The progression showed increasingly intensive investigation, suggesting she was narrowing her focus with each visit. "What did they examine specifically?" Cael asked. "You mentioned supernatural bloodlines and hereditary powers." Aldrich moved to another section of the reading room, where leather-bound volumes rested on specially designed stands. "Our collection includes genealogical records from multiple realms, with particular strength in documenting supernatural heritage, families with demonic ancestry, divine bloodlines, shapeshifter lineages, that sort of thing." He gestured towards several volumes. Lady Nightwind focused on general demonic heritage documentation, broad surveys of known bloodlines and their characteristics. Miss Darkwater narrowed her research to specific families from the Shadowlands and Umbral Realm, cross-referencing birth records with power manifestation reports. And Professor Stormheart? She was looking for something very specific: bloodline authentication methods, ways to verify supernatural heritage in individuals who might not know their own ancestry. Also hereditary power patterns, particularly focusing on how supernatural abilities manifest in mixed-blood descendants. The pattern was clear now. Ravina had begun with general research into demonic bloodlines, narrowed her focus to specific families from realms she had connections to, and finally concentrated on methods for identifying individuals with hidden supernatural heritage. "Did any of them find what they were looking for?" Cael asked. Aldrich considered the question carefully. Lady Nightwind and Miss Darkwater left with many notes but no apparent resolution. They seemed to be gathering information for further investigation elsewhere. But Professor Stormheart... He paused, his expression troubled. She found something that excited her greatly, spent her final 2 hours examining one specific document repeatedly, making detailed copies. What document? A genealogical chart documenting bloodline dispersal patterns after the Great Realm Wars. It tracked how supernatural families scattered across different realms to escape persecution, including many who settled in neutral territories like Concordia. Aldrich moved to a secured cabinet and withdrew a thick, leather-bound volume. This one, specifically. He opened the book to reveal intricate family trees drawn in multiple coloured inks, showing complex relationships between different supernatural lineages. Names, dates, and locations were meticulously documented, with special notations for individuals who had gone into hiding or assumed false identities. She was particularly interested in this section, Aldrich said, pointing to a portion of the chart labelled Concordian Settlements, Hidden Heritage Families. Bloodlines that established themselves in the city during the post-war period, often concealing their true nature to avoid continued persecution. Cael studied the complex diagram, noting dozens of family names with annotations about supernatural abilities, dates of arrival in Concordia, and methods used to conceal their heritage. If Ravina had been searching for individuals with hidden supernatural ancestry, this document would have been invaluable. Any particular families that drew her attention? He asked. Several, but she spent considerable time copying information about families whose supernatural heritage had been dormant for generations. Bloodlines where the supernatural traits might manifest unexpectedly in descendants who had no knowledge of their true ancestry. This was it, the key to understanding Ravina's real purpose in Concordia. She hadn't come to oversee military operations or research programs. She'd come searching for individuals with hidden supernatural heritage, people who might not even know what they really were. But why? What could she want with such individuals? And more disturbing, was she searching for specific people, or was she evaluating the entire population for supernatural potential? Master Aldrich, Cael said carefully, did Professor Stormheart ask about accessing current population records? Ways to cross-reference these historical bloodlines with present-day residents? The archivist's expression grew even more troubled. She did indeed. Asked about birth records, marriage certificates, family registration documents. Anything that might help trace these historical bloodlines to their current descendants. He lowered his voice. I told her such records were restricted under occupation protocols, but someone with sufficient authority could certainly gain access to them through official channels. A military commander, for instance, would have no difficulty obtaining such documentation. Cael felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with uncomfortable clarity. Ravina had used the archives to identify families with hidden supernatural heritage, then leveraged her official position to access current records that would let her trace those bloodlines to living descendants. She wasn't just researching genealogy, she was hunting specific people in Concordia, individuals whose supernatural heritage made them valuable for purposes she hadn't yet revealed. The game she'd created with him suddenly took on a more sinister aspect. Was he being tested because she suspected he might have supernatural ancestry? Or was his network being evaluated for its ability to locate and monitor individuals she'd identified through her research? Master Aldrich, Cael said, I need to ask you for a considerable favour, one that might put you at some risk. The old archivist studied him with sharp eyes. What kind of favour? I need to examine the same documents Professor Stormheart copied, and I need to know if anyone has accessed current population records through official channels in the past few weeks. Aldrich was quiet for a long moment, weighing the request against potential consequences. You're investigating her, aren't you? The professor or whoever she really is. Yes, Cael admitted. And what I discover might be crucial for protecting people who don't even know they're in danger. The archivist nodded slowly. Then we'd better get started. But I warn you, if this research is as sensitive as I suspect, then you're walking into territory that could get us both eliminated. I understand the risks, Cael replied. The question is whether we can afford not to take them. As Aldrich began retrieving the documents Ravina had studied so intensively, Cael reflected on how dramatically his investigation had evolved. What had begun as a search for her real purpose had become something far more urgent, a race to understand who she was hunting and why, before she could complete whatever plan she'd been methodically implementing for months. The White Lily had accepted a challenge that was proving more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. But there was no turning back now, not when the safety of unknown individuals depended on unraveling Ravina's true objectives before time ran out. 6 days remained in her timeline. But Cael was beginning to suspect the real deadline wasn't her 2-week limit. It was whatever event she was preparing for that would make her genealogical research irrelevant. The hunt was almost over. The question was who would prove to be the ultimate prey. Chapter 20. The Vanishing. Day 8 of Ravina's challenge. 6 days remaining to solve her puzzle, and Cael was discovering a pattern that made his blood run cold. The Ashford family's youngest son, gone. Left for what his parents believed was an apprenticeship in the eastern provinces, though no one could recall the name of his supposed master. Eleanor Brightwater departed suddenly to care for a sick aunt in a realm her neighbours had never heard of. Her house stood empty, garden withering from neglect. Marcus Ironwood simply vanished one night, leaving behind only a note about new opportunities that his family insisted wasn't written in his usual hand. All of them had been on the genealogical charts. All had supernatural heritage they likely didn't even know about. And all had disappeared within days of Cael's network, identifying them as potential descendants of hidden bloodlines. A soft knock interrupted his grim accounting. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. Cael opened the door to find Tavin, his young runner, with an expression that confirmed his worst fears. "Another one's gone missing," Tavin said without preamble. "Lydia Shadowmere. Her landlord says she left for educational opportunities in Umbral, paid 3 months' rent in advance, and took nothing but a travelling bag." Cael felt his jaw tighten. 6 days to solve Ravina's puzzle, and each piece of evidence made the solution more elusive. When? 2 days ago. Same pattern as the others. Sudden departure. Vague destination. Family accepts the explanation without question. Tavin's youthful face was troubled. "Sir, that's 7 people this month. All from the families you've been researching." 7. 7 people with hidden supernatural heritage, all vanished after his network had identified them. But was this Ravina's true purpose? Some kind of recruitment operation? It felt too straightforward, too obvious for the challenge she'd presented. "Any word from our contacts about how these opportunities are being presented?" Cael asked. "Henrik's clockwork devices picked up something interesting," Tavin replied. "Official-looking messengers have been visiting these families. Well-dressed, carrying documents with authentic seals. They make generous offers: apprenticeships, educational positions, employment with noble houses in other realms." "All leading out of Concordia," Cael noted. That could be significant, if her purpose was removing people from the city rather than controlling them within it. "And all perfectly legal. The families sign contracts, receive payment in advance, even get letters from their relatives confirming safe arrival." Tavin's expression darkened. "But the letters all sound the same, like they were written by someone copying phrases rather than expressing genuine thoughts." As Tavin departed, Cael stared at his notes, trying to piece together Ravina's true purpose with only 6 days remaining. The disappearances were real, but were they the goal or just a byproduct of something else? Day 10 of Ravina's challenge. 4 days remaining. The final piece of the puzzle came from Cael's own careful observation. He'd been tracking the timing between his network's identification of supernatural descendants and the arrival of recruitment offers. The pattern was too precise to be coincidental. Every family that received offers had been researched by his network within the previous week. Every person who disappeared had been flagged as having potential supernatural heritage in his coded reports. The correlation was perfect, but how was his intelligence being accessed? Cael spent hours reviewing his security protocols, trying to understand how information was leaking from his network to Ravina's recruitment operation. His contacts were loyal, his communication methods secure, his coded reports carefully protected. Then it hit him. What if the information wasn't being stolen? What if it was being given freely by someone who didn't realize what they were really providing? The truth crystallized with horrible clarity. 4 days left to solve Ravina's challenge, and suddenly he understood exactly what her true purpose in Concordia had been. She hadn't come to conduct research herself. She hadn't come to establish a permanent facility. She hadn't even come to recruit a specific number of test subjects. She'd come to learn how to efficiently identify supernatural heritage in any population, using Concordia as a testing ground and his network as an unwitting demonstration project. The disappearances weren't the goal. They were proof of concept, evidence that his methods could accurately locate people with hidden supernatural bloodlines. The genealogical research wasn't Ravina's work. It was a catalyst designed to inspire him to develop the exact techniques she wanted to study. For the past few weeks since discovering the genealogical records, he'd thought he was gathering intelligence to protect people with supernatural heritage. Instead, he'd been providing a masterclass in supernatural detection while she observed every method, noted every success, and prepared to export his techniques to operations across multiple realms. But there was something else, something that made his stomach turn as the full scope became clear. The challenge itself, the game she'd created with him, wasn't separate from her research. It was part of it. She was studying him. Not just his network, not just his methods, but his mind. How a skilled intelligence officer thought, how he processed information, how he built connections and drew conclusions. Every move he made in trying to solve her puzzle was providing her with insights into the psychology of intelligence work itself. The daughter of Loki had turned him into an unwitting professor of supernatural identification, and now she was ready to graduate students who would implement his curriculum in their own territories. But more than that, she'd been studying the instructor as much as the instruction. Chapter 21. The Dead Lily. Day 10 of Ravina's challenge. Later that evening. Cael didn't wait. Every hour he delayed was another hour for Ravina to study his methods, document his techniques, and extract more value from her unwitting professor. He found the lily in his landlady's small garden, a white bloom that had begun to wither at the edges, its petals browning with decay. Perfect. The symbolism wasn't subtle, and he didn't want it to be. This was what she'd done to their agreement, taken something that might have been honourable and twisted it into manipulation and lies. The abandoned chapel was empty in the evening light, its broken windows casting long shadows across the dusty floor. Cael placed the dead lily precisely where the fresh one had been weeks ago, in the exact centre of the altar. He didn't have to wait long. Ravina appeared in the chapel's entrance wearing her human form, elegant, composed, with those familiar violet eyes that seemed to see too much. She approached the altar with fluid grace, her gaze immediately fixing on the withered flower. "Well," she said, her voice carrying that familiar mix of amusement and authority, "someone's eager to finish our game." Cael didn't smile back. "I've completed your challenge, Ravina. I know why you're really here." "Do you?" She moved closer, genuine curiosity in her expression. 4 days early, no less. And what do you think you've discovered? "That you're not here to conduct research," Cael said, his voice flat and controlled. "You're here to learn how someone else conducts research. You've been studying my methods, documenting my network, learning how to identify supernatural heritage in any population." Ravina's smile widened. "Go on." The disappearances, the genealogical records, even this challenge. All of it was designed to make me demonstrate intelligence-gathering techniques while you took notes. His voice grew harder. "You turned me into an unwitting instructor, and now you're planning to teach my methods to others." "Brilliant!" Ravina clapped her hands together, genuine delight in her voice. You figured it out faster than I expected, though I suppose that just proves how excellent an instructor you really are. You used me. I studied you. There's a difference, she gestured to the dead lily. Though I admit, your choice of flower suggests you don't appreciate the distinction. The bargain, Cael said coldly. 2 weeks to discover your true purpose. I succeeded. You leave within the month and take all knowledge of my operations with you. Ravina nodded, still smiling. Indeed I do. Though I'm curious, are you angry because I manipulated you, or because you enjoyed being challenged? I'm angry because you tortured people for entertainment. Entertainment? Ravina's expression shifted, becoming more serious. Oh, my dear Commander, you still don't understand, do you? She moved closer to the altar, her human facade beginning to shift slightly, just enough to hint at the power beneath. I wasn't just entertained by your performance. I was impressed. Do you have any idea how rare it is to find someone who can think strategically, build networks, and adapt to supernatural threats? Her smile returned, sharper now. You've been the most engaging intellectual exercise I've had in decades. I hate that you're proud of me. I know. Her smile widened as her form continued to shift, skin darkening the suggestion of wings at her shoulders. That's what makes it so delicious. Ravina stepped back from the altar, her transformation accelerating. 1 month to leave Concordia, as agreed. Your network remains protected. All knowledge of your operations goes with me. Her elegant human appearance melted away completely as her true nature emerged. Massive black wings, glowing violet eyes, features taking on their demonic aspect. Where the dead lily had been, a single black rose now lay, fresh, perfect, and somehow more elegant. A gift, she said, her voice now carrying inhuman harmonics, to remember our time together. I'll never forget it, Cael said grimly. Good. You shouldn't. Ravina moved toward the chapel's entrance, her wings partially spread. It was fun, Commander. You played the game better than I expected. With a powerful downbeat of her massive wings, she launched into the evening sky and disappeared over Concordia's walls. Cael stood alone in the chapel, staring at the black rose that lay where the dead lily had been. Outside, Concordia continued its daily rhythms, unaware that the daughter of Loki had just honored a bargain that would reshape the city's future. The game was over, the debt was paid, and Commander Cael Varnor was finally free to build something real from the ashes of her manipulation. But as he picked up the black rose, noting how its thorns had been carefully removed, he couldn't shake the feeling that this ending was also a beginning. Ravina might be gone, but the techniques she'd learned, the methods she'd documented, those would live on in other realms, taught to other intelligence officers. The Shadow War was ending in Concordia, but somewhere else, it was just beginning. Chapter 22, 6 Months of Shadow. The autumn rain fell steadily on Concordia's cobblestones as Cael watched the evening crowd from his corner in the broken shield. 6 months since Ravina's departure, and the city had transformed into something almost unrecognizable. Black Dawn soldiers still patrolled, but with the relaxed confidence of men who no longer expected serious resistance. Ravina's final orders had been elegantly simple: maintain portal control, prevent unauthorized travel, and govern with enough restraint to avoid requiring her personal attention. The implied threat had proven remarkably effective at encouraging moderation. Different world now, isn't it? Mira commented, approaching his table with easy confidence. The constant undercurrent of fear that had defined the occupation had faded to manageable wariness. Trade's picking up, she continued. Different kind of trade, but still. That was an understatement. With official portals restricted to Black Dawn operations, the House of Night Whispers had evolved from information brokers into the backbone of an underground economy. Their secret network now moved goods that couldn't travel through official channels, and Cael's arrangement with Lucienne had become less dramatic but far more profitable for everyone involved. Your friend from the eastern provinces sent word, Mira said quietly. The shipment should arrive within the week. Eleanor. After months of uncertainty, she'd established secure communication from Lady Vess's relocated household in the umbral realm. Her survival confirmed that not everyone swept up in Ravina's departure had suffered for it. The evening's intelligence came through Wilfred, who managed a smaller tavern and had a talent for gathering information from loose-tongued Black Dawn officers. Half the garrison's being transferred within 6 months, he reported. Concordia's been reclassified as a stable administrative zone. The troops are heading to Eastern Realms for expanded research initiatives. Cael felt a chill. Ravina's study of his techniques hadn't ended with her departure. Somewhere in those Eastern Realms, other populations were being subjected to the same methodical procedures she'd perfected here. The methods she'd learned from watching him were being exported across Black Dawn's expanding operations. As the tavern closed and Cael walked home through streets that were dangerous only in ordinary ways, he reflected on their strange victory. Not the dramatic overthrow he'd once imagined, but the patient cultivation of space for human dignity to reassert itself. Concordia breathed again. Its people planned futures they could influence, and, in the shadows, networks ensured that the freedoms they'd gained would be protected. The black rose still sat on his windowsill, perfectly preserved months later, a reminder that some games ended with mutual respect rather than destruction. Ravina had honoured her bargain, but the techniques she'd learned continued shaping events in realms he might never see. 6 months of adaptation had created something worth protecting. The question was whether they'd have the time and wisdom to preserve it. Chapter 23. The Rift Maker. The intelligence arrived in fragments over 3 weeks, each piece adding weight to a revelation that threatened to reshape everything Cael thought he understood about portal magic and Concordia's strategic importance. The first report came through Elara, whose position in Lady Vess's relocated household had proven invaluable for monitoring high-level Black Dawn communications. Her coded message was brief but alarming. New construction project in Shadowmere. Massive facility. Officers calling it the Rift Engine. Highest security classification. The second piece arrived through the Broken Shield's most reliable source of military gossip. Sergeant Torres, a grizzled veteran whose deployment rotation had brought him back to Concordia with stories that sobered even veteran drinkers. You wouldn't believe what they're building out there. Torres slurred into his 4th ale, his usual caution eroded by alcohol and the need to share what he'd witnessed. Machine the size of a cathedral, all crystal and metal that hums like it's alive. They say it can punch holes through reality itself. Cael maintained his cover as an interested civilian, encouraging the sergeant with well-timed questions and fresh drinks. Sounds like something out of a legend. That's what I thought. Until I saw it work. Torres's voice dropped to a whisper. Watched them open a rift to the volcanic realms without any local ley lines, without any permanent portal structures. Just pointed this thing at empty air and tore a hole right through to another world. The third confirmation came from an unexpected source, one of Madame Soleil's former girls, who'd maintained contact through the Night Whispers network after being evacuated months earlier. Her message was coded but clear. The old rules don't apply anymore. Space itself bends to new will, traditional gates becoming obsolete. Within days, similar reports flooded in from across Cael's network. Every source with connections to Black Dawn operations was hearing the same whispers. Lord Draven had achieved the impossible, creating technology that could open rifts to any realm, at any location, without relying on local ley line intersections. But it was Lucian who provided the crucial detail that made sense of the impossible. "We've confirmed the source of his power," Lucien said during their clandestine meeting in the abandoned temple. "Draven hasn't bypassed the ley line system, he's stolen it. Entirely." Cael felt his blood chill. Stolen how? Eldermire. His fortress was built on what was once the largest portal nexus in all the connected realms before it was destroyed in the ancient wars. Lucian's elegant features showed rare concern. Our sources indicate he's somehow rerouted all of Eldermire's ley lines to converge at his rebuilt facility. Every scrap of portal energy that once flowed through natural intersections across the realm now feeds directly into his rift engine. The implications were staggering. He's turned an entire realm into his personal power source. More than that, by controlling all ley line energy in Eldermire, he can project portal rifts anywhere in the connected realms. Distance becomes irrelevant when you have access to that much concentrated portal energy. Lucien began pacing the temple's narrow aisle. It's like having a river dammed and redirected. Instead of flowing naturally through dozens of streams, all that power rushes through a single channel he controls completely. And if he can bypass natural portal limitations, then he can move armies anywhere he chooses, establish supply lines that can't be cut, and strike targets that considered themselves safely beyond his reach. Lucien stopped pacing. More immediately for us, it means traditional portal nexuses like Concordia become optional. The conversation was interrupted by Taven arriving with trade intelligence that confirmed their worst fears. Eastern trade routes were collapsing as goods appeared directly at their destinations, bypassing conventional portal networks entirely. Merchants couldn't compete with delivery times measured in hours rather than weeks. After Taven departed, Cael and Lucien sat in contemplative silence, processing the magnitude of what they were discussing. The Rift engine wasn't just military innovation. It was fundamental disruption of the economic and political relationships holding the connected realms together. There's one more detail, Lucien said finally. The energy drain from redirecting an entire realm's ley lines. Our sources suggest it's already having catastrophic effects in Eldermere itself. What kind of effects? Portal-dependent systems failing. Natural magical phenomena shutting down. Some reports of reality itself becoming unstable in areas where ley lines were forcibly redirected. Lucian's voice carried genuine worry. Draven may have solved the problem of long-distance portal projection, but he's potentially destroying an entire realm in the process. As their meeting concluded, Cael reflected on how dramatically the landscape had shifted. 6 months of relative peace, and now everything was threatened by technology that made their carefully constructed arrangements irrelevant. If Draven could open rifts anywhere by monopolizing an entire realm's portal energy, then Concordia's nexus lost its strategic importance. The underground economy that had sustained recovery became meaningless when conventional trade couldn't compete with instant transportation. Most disturbing was understanding that this might explain why Ravina had been so confident about honoring their bargain. She'd known Draven was developing technology that would make Concordia's portal network obsolete. Her departure hadn't been magnanimous. It had been calculated timing. The black rose on his windowsill seemed to mock him as he returned home. Ravina's gift represented mutual respect, but also proof she'd been playing a far larger game than he'd understood. The Shadow War was evolving again, but now the stakes involved the stability of reality itself across multiple realms. And somewhere in Eldermire, Lord Draven was reshaping the fundamental nature of space and magic to serve his ambitions, regardless of what it cost the realm he was draining to power his impossible machine. Chapter 24. The Wanderer's Tale. The elf walked into the broken shield like he owned every realm he'd ever set foot in. Tall, lean, with the kind of weathered elegance that spoke of centuries spent walking paths others couldn't see, he moved through the evening crowd with casual confidence that made even the Black Dawn soldiers unconsciously step aside. Cael noticed him immediately, not because of his pointed ears, which were concealed beneath a worn traveller's hat, but because of the way he moved. There was something in his gait that suggested familiarity with ground that shifted between worlds. a subtle awareness of spaces beyond the merely physical. The stranger approached the bar with the easy smile of someone accustomed to being welcomed wherever he wandered. His clothes were practical: leather jacket, sturdy boots, garments that could handle whatever a journey between realms might require. But there was something about him that spoke of distant places and stranger sights than Concordia typically offered. "Bartender!" he called out cheerfully, his voice carrying a musical quality that hinted at non-human origins. "I'd like to buy this fine establishment a round. Everyone drinks my treat." The announcement generated immediate interest from the tavern's patrons. Free drinks were rare enough during the occupation to draw attention from every corner of the room. "That's generous, friend," Mira said, approaching with professional caution mixed with genuine curiosity. "What's the occasion?" "Good news," the elf replied, producing a leather pouch that clinked with the promising sound of quality coins. "Just came from the most amazing place, and I'm feeling celebratory." As word of free drinks spread through the tavern, patrons began clustering around the bar area. Black Dawn soldiers mixed with labourers, merchants, and the usual assortment of people whose business was best conducted in taverns after dark. "Amazing place?" asked Sergeant Torres, who'd been nursing his usual evening ales. "What kind of place?" The elf's grin widened. "A realm called Earth. Quaint little world where they think magic is just stories and legends, but tucked away in one of their cities is this bar. Shadow Realm, they call it. Most incredible gathering place you've ever seen?" He gestured expansively as Mira began pouring drinks for the growing crowd. "Picture this: a tavern where every supernatural being in the connected realms eventually finds their way. Dragons sharing drinks with vampires, fae trading stories with demons, shapeshifters playing cards with angels who've decided to take the night off from being celestial." "Sounds like a fantasy," someone called out from the back of the crowd. "That's the beauty of it," the elf laughed. "The humans on Earth think it's just an elaborate themed bar. They come in thinking the supernatural beings are just people in really good costumes. Meanwhile, we're all there having the time of our lives, and they have no idea they're sharing drinks with actual creatures of legend." Cael found himself drawn closer, intrigued despite himself. There was something infectious about the stranger's enthusiasm, and his story had the ring of truth rather than mere tavern tale. "The parties there are legendary," the elf continued, accepting a drink for himself while coins continued flowing to cover the promised round. "Last week I watched a phoenix teach a group of human college students what they thought was an impressive fire-breathing trick. The humans were amazed by the special effects, and the phoenix was delighted to have such an appreciative audience." "How do the humans not realize?" asked one of the labourers, clearly fascinated despite his skepticism. "Because they don't expect reality to include the impossible," the elf replied with the wisdom of someone who'd seen many worlds. "They see what fits their understanding of the world and dismiss everything else as elaborate illusion. It's actually quite charming. They're so determined to rationalize everything that they explain away the most obvious magic as clever technology." He took a long pull of his ale, then continued. "The bar's owner is this ancient entity, older than most realms, possibly older than time itself. Goes by Silas when dealing with humans, but those of us in the know understand he's something far more significant. He maintains the space as neutral ground, where anyone can come and just be themselves." "Neutral ground?" Mira asked, refilling his mug. "No politics, no realm conflicts, no settling of ancient grudges. Just good drinks, better company, and the kind of entertainment you can only get when beings from every corner of reality decide to party together." The elf's expression grew wistful. "There's something pure about it. A place where a war-weary demon can share war stories with a battle angel, and they both remember why they used to be friends before the cosmic bureaucracy made them enemies." As he spoke, Cael noticed something subtle but significant. The tension that usually characterized evenings in the Broken Shield was dissipating. Black Dawn soldiers were laughing at the elf's stories alongside the very civilians they were supposed to be controlling. The artificial divisions that the occupation had created seemed less important when faced with tales of a place where such divisions simply didn't matter. The music there is something else entirely, the elf continued, warming to his subject. Last month, there was this impromptu concert where a siren provided vocals, a satyr played percussion that would make your heart weep, and a group of humans with guitars tried to keep up. The humans thought they were jamming with incredibly talented street musicians. The supernatural crowd was experiencing the kind of musical fusion that happens maybe once per century. "And you just found this place?" asked Captain Morrison, one of the Black Dawn officers who'd been drawn into the crowd. "That's what I do," the elf said simply. "I'm a realm walker. I find the old paths, the forgotten portals, the places where the boundaries between worlds grow thin. Sometimes I discover ruins, sometimes I find new territories, and sometimes—" his smile became particularly bright. "Sometimes I find perfect little pockets of joy that make all the wandering worthwhile." "Must be lonely work," Mira observed. "Not when you know there are places like Shadow Realm waiting to be discovered. Gives you faith that somewhere in the vast network of connected realms, there's always another celebration just beginning. Another group of unlikely friends sharing stories over drinks that would be impossible in any single world." He finished his ale and stood, dropping enough coins on the bar to cover the promised round plus a generous tip. "Speaking of which, the ley lines are calling. There's a trail I've been following that leads towards some very interesting territory, and I have a feeling tonight's the perfect time to see where it goes." "You're leaving already?" asked Torres, who'd been thoroughly entertained by the stranger's tales. "That's the nature of wandering, friend. Stay too long in any one place and you risk missing the next amazing discovery." The elf tipped his hat to the crowd. "But remember what I've told you, somewhere out there is a place where all the impossible things you've heard whispered about are just people having a good time together. Sometimes that's worth remembering when the world feels too serious for its own good." As he headed toward the door, several patrons called out thanks for the drinks and well wishes for his travels. The elf waved cheerfully, then paused at the threshold. "Oh, and if any of you ever find yourselves in the Earth Realm, specifically in a city called Traversity, look for a bar with no sign and a door that feels like it leads somewhere deeper than the building should allow. Tell Silas that Ronan the Wanderer sent you. First drinks on me." With that, he stepped out into the night, leaving behind a tavern full of people who were looking at each other with something approaching wonder. The effect lingered long after his departure. Conversations that had been stilted by the constant awareness of occupation and control became more genuine. Laughter came easier. For perhaps the first time since the Black Dawn's arrival, the Broken Shield felt like a place where people from different backgrounds were simply sharing drinks and stories rather than maintaining careful pretenses. Cael remained at his corner table processing what he'd witnessed. The elf, Ronan, had accomplished something remarkable without apparent effort. He'd planted a seed of possibility, a reminder that beyond the immediate struggles and restrictions of occupied life, there existed spaces where such concerns became irrelevant. More than that, he demonstrated something that felt increasingly important as Draven's rift technology threatened to reshape the fundamental nature of realm travel. No matter how much power anyone accumulated, no matter how dramatically they disrupted established systems, there would always be wanderers finding new paths, discovering hidden places, and carrying stories that connected distant communities. As the evening wound down and the crowd gradually dispersed, Mira approached Cael's table with a thoughtful expression. "Interesting fellow," she said, beginning her usual cleaning routine. "Almost made me forget we're living in occupied territory." "That might have been the point," Cael replied, watching through the window as Black Dawn soldiers walked alongside civilians in groups that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. "Think he was real? The bar? The stories?" Cael considered the question seriously. I think he was exactly what he appeared to be, someone who's seen enough impossible things to know they're all possible. Whether the specific details are true or not matters less than the reminder that there's always more to reality than what we can see from where we're standing. As he made his way home through streets that felt subtly different, less tense, more hopeful, Cael reflected on the evening's unexpected gift. Tomorrow would bring new intelligence about Draven's rift technology, new concerns about the stability of leyline networks, new challenges to the delicate balance they'd achieved in Concordia. But tonight, a wandering elf had reminded an entire tavern that somewhere beyond the reach of any tyrant's ambition, impossible friendships were being forged over drinks that defied logic, and the only thing that mattered was finding reasons to celebrate the absurd wonder of existence itself. It was, Cael thought, exactly the kind of perspective that would be crucial for surviving whatever came next.